Collective Elevation also offers weekly doctor appointments. They're open 7 days a week,
10 seconds.
to 7 weekdays, and 11 to 5 on weekends. For more information, find Collective Elevation on Facebook or by phone at 565-5850.
Welcome to my art form.
It's time for Post-Orthodoxy, the show about changing our minds.
Yeah, baby.
With your host, Dark and Ainsley Sevier.
Maybe what they believe about reality isn't all of reality?
What?
I know, right?
We're on a mission to have a better time with more people more often.
The question is, how do you get
Post-Orthodoxy explores strongly held beliefs, how those belief systems divide or connect people, and what might be found beyond those reality bubbles.
Keep calm, don't lose your head.
I've got a piece of chocolate here with me because I got anxiety about doing this.
Welcome to this neighborhood, neighbor.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to the neighborhood, neighbor. You're now tuned into Post-Orthodoxy on KBMF LP Butte, 102.5 FM, America's most radio, or potentially you're listening online at butteamericaradio.org/stream. I'm Ainsley Sevier, and with me in the station today, as always, is Citizen DJ Dark Sevier.
Howdy.
Thank you so much to the Noracle for that fantastic show, Songs of Love and Horror, every Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. And after Post-Orthodoxy is over at 6 p.m., it will be time for Daniel and Patty with the Sunday Smackdown from 6 to 8 p.m. Sundays.
2 hours goes really fast with us.
It goes real fast. I hope you'll stick around.
We have all these things we want to talk about, and we don't get to a lot of them.
It's true.
Sometimes, for the last 2 weeks, we've been trying to get to some letters from folks, one from South African correspondent, Mokano.
It's true.
From a couple shows
We
ago.
have these great people who are sending us letters.
Yeah.
They're sending us letters.
Yes.
And we keep forgetting to take time to listen to read them and talk about this input that feedback, which
yes.
is what we want. This is a participatory show. This is a show about changing our minds, not just mine and Dark's minds, but hopefully somewhere out there we introduce a little bit of something into your system that enables you to become sovereign over your own mind and free yourself from the algorithmic social engineering that we all experience every day.
Speaking of, let's begin the countdown for we're taking bets right now on when our live feed will be cut off on Facebook.
I'd say at 27 minutes.
You say 27?
That's usually around when it happens.
Within the first half hour?
It cuts out within the first half hour, 22 to 27 minutes, and then we have to reboot the whole thing. And so we hope that you guys will jump with us to the next video when that inevitably happens.
So we don't have the explicit mark on our up on the URL
It's
address
true.
yet.
It's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, it is.
Because we have a theory that there is a conspiracy that Facebook doesn't want people using their live video function for free.
I think maybe if you really want to get some traffic, you better pay for it. I also think that in this sort of new information policing, which I think is going to be a topic of our show next week. We have a friend of the show from Helena coming in to talk about his recent
experience with
censorship, which is fairly, it's alarming. I come from a background of doing stand-up comedy, and when I don't think irony is recognized by the artificial intelligence.
No, the artificial intelligence does a really great job, but it has censored some jokes recently.
Yes.
And I mean, maybe some people are like, you just shouldn't joke about certain things.
No, so like we had a really nice, poignant quote from Malcolm McLuhan,
a Canadian
philosopher. And so one of my friends, who I think fairly agreed with the statement, ironically said, "Damn Canadians."
Right.
And his
as in like, oh shucks, they just say the darndest things. Like it was good.
Yeah, and then he was his comment was removed from my thread.
Deleted.
So we have a lot of things we want to talk about. We're going to deal with current events. We're always looking at these things through the lens of the theme of the show, which is Orthodox mindsets, fundamentalisms, things accepted as reality that suddenly are not.
The way that you think the world is that maybe isn't the way the world is for everyone, and that the more you can realize that maybe you were given perspectives to have about the world around you that are not your own perspectives,
May not be your perspectives.
the more you can become sovereign over your own mind.
Might not have picked it up on your own.
It's true.
So,
did you already share our live stream video on your timeline?
I did.
Fantastic. For those of you that are listening online at perhaps buteamericaradio.org/stream or 102.5 FM locally, we are also live streaming via video stream on facebook.com/AinsleySevier, Ainsley Helen, or twitch.tv/theseviers, where we take comments and questions and responses from our listeners. So love doing that.
Right. So speaking of comments and questions, we have some feedback that has been considered and written down and delivered to us that we didn't get to in the last couple of weeks due to hubbub. So much to talk about.
Oh, so much to
talk about. So I thought it'd be good just to
Pretty sure this is actually like 3 weeks old.
Take care of some house cleaning before we get into today's show.
As part of our ongoing bit where we update you on all the things happening with coronavirus that we've heard about over the past week, we're going to read this piece from our foreign correspondent Mokai Malope, he wrote this in response to us kind of dissecting the fight to figure out how to heal this country from the coronavirus problem has become a red versus blue fight.
It's become a political issue more than a medical issue.
And people think political things about you based on whether you wear a mask or not.
Right. So we've been dealing with the politics of this medical issue, which is really, I'm fascinated by it. That's what we love the show to it. So what was our South African correspondent's
Mokai Malope, "The World is in the Ring with COVID-19" is the title of his piece. As economies slowly open up their guard after the novel coronavirus backed the world into a corner with punches that brought the world to its knees. The first round went to COVID-19 as its punches spread to all corners of the earth. Some punches were so powerful, parts of the world pretended it was a hoax or fake punches designed to influence an election 10 months away. When the round ended, we ran to the corner bloodied and bruised by death and high infections. We closed ranks, borders, economies, and told everyone to stay home. We stayed in our corner and weighed up this new opponent that doesn't even retreat to its corner after the round. Parts of the world were content with waiting in the corner while science comes up with a strategy to beat this terrible foe. Another part of the world wanted to get up and fight, or just get out of the corner because the endless supply of toilet paper was not edible. Science said we should wait, but the economy wanted the world on its feet, and the world got up, put on a mask, sanitized, and ignored the economy coach suggesting we drink disinfectant. The strategy for round 2 is simple. We are going to keep our distance and wash our hands as often as we can. Others want to include washing their hair and getting a manicure during the fight.
Yes.
COVID-19 kept the punches coming while we argued about meat shortages and whether injecting sunlight in our veins was a joke or not. We have no cure or vaccine to attack with, but a llama in Belgium is giving scientists hope. Madagascar is shouting on the sidelines about a herbal brew, but the world told it to shut up and make an appointment with science. Science is fully booked for the next few months, it said. Is there really no hope for the world? Usually when there is no hope, the world turns to the church for help. Can the church help the world defeat COVID-19? No pastor has volunteered to get into the ring, and no prophet is giving odds on how this round will end or how long the fight will last. I think they're streaming the fight from home. COVID-19 knocked out Easter and now threatens Christmas too. Maybe if churches help the world win this fight, no one will ever question what Noah fed the lions ever again. Maybe this fight will end in September so that we can celebrate New Year's Day with Ethiopia and welcome back the year 2013. This way we can attempt the year 2020 with experience and with 7 years to prepare. It's round 2 now. The world is angry and Popeye has had his spinach and we are facing COVID-19 head on like the economy is demanding. Hopefully by round 3, science will have made a plan or perhaps an appointment with Madagascar and hopefully we will survive the round. Eesh.
That's some feedback and perspective from global partner and
Pros.
South African correspondent.
Mokai Shucks Malope.
Mokai Malope. Thanks for. Sorry it took us so long to get that one out.
So sorry. Is Ethiopia really 7 years behind us? Like the Mayans are kind of on their own calendar. The Ethiopians
Mayans are. The Chinese are.
Chinese aren't on the same year that a lot of people are.
The Hebrew calendar's got its own thing going on. Yeah.
So yeah. Sure. Let's reset to 2013 and do the next 7 years over again.
Right.
Mm.
Wow, thanks, Mokai.
Thank you, Mokai. That was a beautiful piece of prose.
Jay Hilligus, David Hutchins are listening.
Jason Silvernail. Thanks for tuning in this afternoon, guys.
Boyce Brown is tuning in from Hawaii.
Lisa Lee in California.
That's right.
We appreciate you guys.
We have an exciting show today. We have other feedback from previous shows before we launch into the current events of our current show.
It's true.
Who else has been talking to us offline?
So sometimes people will send us emails because
Private messages.
they listen via the radio,
right,
and or aren't on Facebook, and or need to take some time,
which I appreciate.
Totally, before they
state their perspective.
Yeah, some people can comment on the fly, and some people just want to take a minute and think about what they were saying. That's right. And so we did a show a few weeks ago, that we titled "The Religion of the Mask."
Yes.
Which our intention in that title was just to talk about
dogmas, because that's our show.
Our show is about things that you're not allowed to talk about. Dogmas. And this correspondent wrote a wonderful email response to the religion of the mask, and how, people are basically like, why can't you just wear the mask? Or, I'm never wearing a mask ever.
Right. And very strongly held feelings about this medical issue. She
said, great show yesterday. Thank you for continuing to make people think. I wanted to comment on how I feel about the mask, but I couldn't put it into words yesterday. Today, I realized it is all about fear to me, and I can't handle that. Fear of dying, fear of living, fear of having no control. I picture the mask like the school desk we were supposed to duck and cover under during a nuclear attack. Absolutely pointless, but it was something to do? ? I am not willing to stop living to be alive. I didn't grow up with fear, and I don't understand that state of mind very well. My comment to people putting sanitizer on continuously is, that is what is going to kill us.
Yes.
There is an effective amount of good bacteria that we need, and frankly, it has kept our species alive for thousands of years. Throwing the good out with the bad seems very counterproductive to me. As my son would say, control is an illusion. Life might be easier to live if we let go of control a little. I appreciate your shows. Keep it up.
Do we know who that is, or?
I haven't asked her specifically. I haven't asked her specifically if it was okay for us to say her name. So
we appreciate that feedback.
And then we also have feedback from another friend of the show about the plague.
The plague.
Yeah. Yes. From a couple, even further weeks ago when all this was still going down.
Okay.
It's just a short note. I live in stark terror, knowing that a critical mass of my beloved relatives live in Florida and Texas. 2 states governed by, and this is her word, Trumpublicans.
Okay.
Most of these relatives are Christian and some evangelical. My sister is hunkering down, hoping for the rapture. I'm terrified. So she's scared for her family's well-being, as well as for the well-being of the people that they might affect.
Right.
And this was back in March.
Right.
When the consensus lent more towards this virus is probably going to kill a lot of people.
Right.
We now know that those numbers are nowhere near what we're threatened.
There was a lot of conflation of numbers that gave us. There was also really bad use of language. People, like, for when we did our show last week, the big noise was 100,000 people died of coronavirus. But if you really
so far in the
U.S., speaking to our U.S. audience from our U.S. sources in our fourth estate, dying from the coronavirus is very different than dying with the coronavirus.
In your system.
Is different than dying of the coronavirus.
Yes.
So many people died that had coronavirus.
Who were tested and found to have coronavirus in their system.
Very few died of the coronavirus. But we keep talking about 100,000 dead of the coronavirus, and that's not true. It's not true. And mainstream news sources, really respected journalists say of. And it's bad. It's bad information. And it's like when people thought half the country is racist because we elected Trump, but only 18% of the eligible voting people voted for Trump.
Right.
That's not half the country. 18% is not half the country.
I'm sorry, the Democrats and Republicans don't make up 100% of the country.
No, they do not.
Yeah, or like you said
They're
earlier,
local minorities.
When health officials and government training was conflating HIV with AIDS. They acted like those were the two same things.
Yeah, people, when they said everybody, they gave the numbers of people who had HIV and conflated those numbers with the people who had AIDS. AIDS was something that you got if you had HIV.
Right.
Many people had HIV that never got AIDS, but they would just intermix those numbers and scare the hell out of people. So the same thing is happening with this virus. We know recently I did.
Well, and statistically, when you look that statistic up, the statistic that we were sharing last week about this 110,000 people in the U.S. have died from coronavirus would be a much different statistic than what is actually happening, which is 110,000 people, most of whom already had serious illnesses, died and also had coronavirus in their system. So in actuality, fewer people have died because we've all been staying home and not driving and not getting as drunk and not getting out in fights. And for statistical data to back up that premise, we shared the data coming out of the New York City hospital. And they shared as of May 13th, their data for number of deaths at the New York City hospital was about 15,000 people who had died with coronavirus in their system. And of those 15,000 people, only about 1,000 had no pre-existing conditions. And what they actually shared in their statistics is that they knew 99 people didn't have comorbidities like diabetes or hypertension or morbid obesity.
Right.
Only 99 people didn't. They didn't even test 1,500 other people to see if they had other underlying problems. They just died, and also they had coronavirus, and that sucks.
Right.
But so 99 people out of 15,000 people who died, only 99 of them were actually healthy people.
Right. As far as we know.
Well, according to the New York City statistics, like these
Right.
people all already had hypertension, asthma, diabetes, all things which cause you to suffer more from coronavirus than a healthy person.
So these are things where do you get your information? What kind of information are you getting? And how does that information make you feel? There's a lot of fear going around because 100,000 people died of coronavirus. They didn't.
They didn't all die
100,000
from coronavirus.
people died with
Yes.
coronavirus. Very different number. There's an article that I'd like to share. I'm just going to do the opening paragraph. I shared a link to the article on our Facebook live stream if somebody wants to look into it.
All right.
I thought it was really interesting because I have a pretty active Facebook page. I get involved in a lot of dialogues with a lot of people. This is the lowest commented and liked thing on my page in the last week.
And it's an Atlantic article, right?
From the far right-wing conspiracy page, The Atlantic.
No one's interacted with it.
Nobody's, well, just one guy.
From the
Paul
Atlantic.
Paul Niehaus liked it, and he had a statement. But yeah, it's from The Atlantic. So, and this is an article from the 21st of last month.
Okay.
I think it's relevant. It says, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is conflating the results of two different types of coronavirus tests.
Conflating means mixing them up as if they're the same thing.
They're distorting several important metrics and providing the country with an inaccurate picture of the state of the pandemic. We've learned that the CDC is making, at best, a debilitating mistake, combining test results that diagnose current coronavirus infections with test results that measure whether someone has ever had the virus. The upshot is that the government's disease-fighting agency is overstating the country's ability to test people who are sick with COVID-19. The agency confirmed to The Atlantic on Wednesday that it was mixing the results of viral and antibody tests, even though the two tests reveal very different information and are used for different reasons.
So what are the differences of those two tests?
This is not merely a technical error. States have set quantitative guidelines for reopening their economies based on the flawed data points. You were saying?
So to explain to people the differences between these two tests, so they're all adding up to say these are all positive cases. A viral test versus a what?
The antibody test. So if they tested me, they probably, because I have a sense that I had the coronavirus in January before it was a thing.
They would probably find antibodies
antibodies in my system, and then I would be
a positive case.
A positive coronavirus case.
Even though you don't have it right now.
I was lazy for 3 weeks in January because of it.
You were not expressing coronavirus
symptoms. I've experienced no symptoms since.
Right.
I would be listed as a coronavirus case by the CDC.
Mm-hmm. Whereas a viral test is a test that is, are you experiencing and actively fighting off the virus right now?
Yeah, those numbers are really important. So if people have already had the virus and no longer have it and have the antibodies, they're being tested, called positive, and we're dictating how we move around as a country because of that, which is really bad information. That's bad information.
It's incorrect. It's faulty. It's not how science. You're not supposed to have science that way. Please don't science.
There's lots of states that are blending that information in the same way. So that was an article that I thought, that seems like it flies in the face of the narrative. That narrative would change a lot of other narratives we need to have. So,
yeah.
But nobody commented on it. Nobody found it an interesting article, which I found interesting.
I think a lot of that can come down to how the algorithm works.
Ooh, let's talk about the algorithm. When do we do that?
We have a lot of things to talk about today, and they're all kind of connected to each other, you know?
Yeah, we zoom out and zoom back in.
Yes.
We rotate around, try to get a bird's eye view, and then come back down and deal with specifics. So bear with us for the next 2 hours.
Yeah, think of our thought process like a spider's web. At the core, we're trying to become sovereigns of our own minds and get over brainwashing and get beyond dogmatic belief systems. And then we branch out into a particular subject area and then head back to the point of the whole thing and then branch out. So if you jump into the show at some point and don't know what's going on, throw us a question on the Facebook comment stream and we'll give you a quick recap of where we are. But as you can guess, today we're going to be talking a lot about racism.
We're dealing with what's happening right now in the news, current events, and what are the dogmas around it, what are the orthodoxies around it.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to talk about this country's history of protest.
Yeah.
When you think of protesting, a lot of people think of the 1960s, when people said, I don't want to go to war, and they started burning the draft cards.
And the bras.
It had big social implications.
Yeah.
The same
citizens. So tell me, what were the big social implications? Because I did not live through that. The citizens were saying, know it's my country, but I'm still not going to go defend it.
Public relations broke down. There were a lot of folks that were opposed to getting involved in a foreign war in World War II. There was an event, Pearl Harbor, which galvanized public opinion because we had been hit and involved in the war, that we should go to war. So the Gulf of Tonkin incident was an event that was meant to galvanize the United States' perception that we should get involved in what was happening in Vietnam. At that time, the Cultural Revolution was happening. There were changes in civil rights. There was a civil rights fight. The psychedelic movement was happening, which was a part of a general cultural revolution against conformity. People were having different perspectives around women's rights, civil rights, who we are as humans, how our society should be structured. That got moved into protest against the Vietnam War. It was an unpopular war. We didn't know why we were there. We didn't get galvanized against that war, and it became our first unpopular war, generally speaking. There was a lot of people that had to support America, and suddenly they were saying, we don't see why we should. We don't know what this fight is about. Is it really about our freedom? Should we be involved in Vietnam? Does this really affect folks? So what happened is the war was then brought home, and that was a part of a cultural battle. People in this country got killed in the battle over whether or not we should go over there and kill those folks and be killed doing that.
Right.
So those iconic images of what protest means, the same thing happened. So there was another form of protest, or that kind of form of protest came out in the late 90s against the World Trade Organization in Seattle. So they called the Battle of Seattle. So it was old style protest. You go out, you say, we don't want to be a part of the scenario because it's bad news. People stopped being lured People stopped being lured into the prescribed battle of the Republicans versus Democrats. They went over their heads and said, we need to deal with the WTO, and we need to start dealing with these larger organizations that are affecting the globe, because that affects us at home. So the battle in Seattle was one of the first instances where we had cameras and we caught people breaking windows that were the black bloc, what they call the black bloc. So we don't know if they are Antifa, we don't know if those are cops in disguise coming in to create violence so that the people who had a peaceful protest are associated with the violence.
Right.
That was a very big moment in protest history in this country.
The first time it went violent, or the first time that we caught people on video starting violence who were not the actual protesters?
Our narrative has been defined by the people who had the pen and who had the camera. It used to be the pen, then it became the camera, and then suddenly the people in the protest had the cameras.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have that before.
Right.
So suddenly we saw that those protests were being infiltrated by forces
Mm-hmm.
that were associated with the police and the government to come in and change public perception of what this protest was about.
Right.
So that since then, there's been all kinds of Occupy Wall Street. There's all kinds of little micro protests. Since then, the dialogue is the power to protest has changed. What happened with the Occupy Wall Street was that the power of Twitter, the power of Facebook, these were new things relatively that enabled people to spontaneously organize and pool.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it wasn't going to get covered by MSNBC or Fox News, you could go to Facebook and see what was going on. Suddenly, what happened in the Arab Spring, Tahrir Square, what happened in Egypt, was all
organized online,
sparked by what was happening simultaneously, what was happening with Occupy Wall Street, and that was about the new technology. The new technology said we can talk to each other,
mm-hmm.
and then we can go en masse immediately and have our voices heard.
Mm-hmm. And you saw some of that in person when you were at Standing Rock.
At Standing Rock, right. There was a struggle over the technology.
I experienced Standing Rock from Georgia. I was living in Georgia at the time, but I heard enough about it I had friended enough progressive people by that point that I was hearing about it on Facebook, and myself and all of my friends at the restaurant we were working at all checked in on Facebook to Standing Rock to try to scramble the government agencies who were trying to make profiles on all the people at Standing Rock.
Martin County was monitoring who was checking into Standing Rock and then going into their Facebook files and trying to figure out who their
mm-hmm.
friends were and who their connections were.
Right.
So suddenly,
people from all over the planet were checking in Standing
Rock,
so they had no idea who to target, which was great. And you on the ground experienced instigators trying to start problems in the camps,
yes.
so that the government agencies and Secret Service on the outside
had
an excuse to, which they used plenty of violence anyway, but it would have gotten way worse.
So
Norma Jean Duffy says, I don't know, but I believe the first protest in the U.S. was the Boston Tea Party, where white folks dressed up like Indians. So that's kind of two...
Cultural appropriation.
Cultural appropriation.
Yeah, that's Black Bloc right there.
Yeah,
right?
but also, I love bringing that one up. That one's been one of my favorite over the past couple of weeks. Anytime somebody says protests shouldn't turn violent, if you don't want to be really pig-headed and say, yeah, well, arrests shouldn't turn to murder, you can say something like, what about the Boston Tea Party? Or what about Jesus overturning the tables in the temple
and
from the tax collectors? You know, like, here are two of your favorite people, my dear conservative friends, who both of these, Jesus and the Boston Tea guys, destroyed property in the name of doing something right.
And if you want to go way back and talk about how shameful it is, what does destruction of property do? Go back to Noah and the flood. I mean, come on now. So
God did it
we
first.
can just keep going back.
Right. Boyce Brown says,
yes.
Nixon said Timothy Leary is the most dangerous man in America.
He probably was. He was very dangerous to the system. Well, Timothy Leary was sort of the messiah of the psychedelic movement, but the LSD entry of LSD into the West Coast revolutionary culture was fostered by the CIA. The CIA was doing tests with LSD.
Right.
People were taking it. The scientists were not taking it, but the people taking it were going, oh my God, I see what they can't see.
Right.
And then we should get more of this.
Yeah.
So
we should have more cognitive liberty. We should have more sovereignty over our own minds.
There's all kinds of stories about CIA working or Timothy Leary working for the FBI too. We can go down that rabbit hole, but that's kind of for another show. I wanted to play a clip real quick and talk about it.
Okay.
One of my friends on Facebook, Cameron Cruzen, I think it was, shared a VPRO documentary. I've never heard of them before.
VPRO?
VPRO is the name of the
You know, in the wake of us not being able to trust our media at all anymore, other media sources are popping up, like Unicorn Riot.
Yes, that's how I found out what was happening in Standing Rock.
Other places you can go to find your news that, I mean, Twitter is really great for this, and I'll probably just keep hammering this, but Twitter is really great because it is a news generating site. There are humans like you and me on Twitter taking videos of what's happening right now, and you can go find it because you can follow that hashtag. You can find the news out, but not from somebody giving it spin.
What we were asking for last week was feedback. We're looking for news sources because during Standing Rock, I had friends, and I could find friends, and I could find sources like Unicorn Riot. So I had a steady feed in my feed of live information coming from Standing Rock.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing the same thing on Facebook now. If you go to Twitter, it's much more active in terms about what is happening in individual places around the country. Facebook has become more of a repeater than a source, in my perspective, from what I'm seeing in my feed.
Yeah.
This is on that note. There's a documentary. It's a VPRO documentary called Shoshana Zuboff on surveillance capitalism.
Surveillance capitalism.
That's the name of her book. She's a Harvard professor.
Let's break that title down etymologically. Surveillance is watching people when they necessarily don't know that they're being watched.
So we have a new
and capitalism is making money off of it.
Yeah, we have a new economy, an information economy. People fill out, there's the notion that people fill out all these, what does your name mean in Klingon or whatever.
Right.
Every one of those things you do is giving access to it's getting access to some entity to go comb through your entire history on Facebook and do facial recognition from your photos, figure out where you eat, get your Google Maps information. So all that information is being used for commercial reasons. So somebody told me that if you sign up for one of these thermostats in your house, Nest thermostats, I think it's called.
I'm tempted by them, but also
if you sign up for one of those thermostats, you would have to read over 1,000 user agreements to be informed about what that thing does. Because all that information is being sent to corporate entities. So right now we're having discussions around Twitter and around Facebook editing what information we can share and what information we can see. But we're not having a debate about all of our information. We cannot edit what Google sees.
Right.
We cannot edit what Amazon sees.
There are certain
or
things
hears.
you can do in your privacy settings that's like, I don't want you to give me targeted ads, just give me normal ads.
No, your cell phone.
It's the illusion.
Right. There's an illusion that we have privacy. The new economy is based on our actions. So in this documentary, she talks about, for example, with Pokemon Go. So this was something that was in process for years by Google. They created are we still in here? They created a startup company, so it wasn't Google's product.
Okay.
Some startup company who had Pokemon Go, and all the kids ran around with their phones. What they did was they used to sell our information to a company and say, okay, hey company, we know when these guys have sex, when they don't have sex, how many kids they have, what their interests are, what kind of music they like, where they travel, how much traveling they do, blah, blah, blah. We know all that stuff. And that was information they were selling. With this information this test program that they did with Pokemon Go, they said, no, actually we can charge you, if you pay us, we will give you actual feet in your business. We will put a little icon in your Starbucks.
It's called a gym.
Yeah, it's some gym in Starbucks, and then people have to go to Starbucks.
They have to go to Starbucks.
We will get people in your door. So this is a quick clip. I just posted a link to it in our Facebook comments, but if you want to find it on YouTube, it's a VPRO documentary. Shoshana Zuboff is the person they're interviewing, and I just want to play a quick 1.5-minute clip to preface where we're going from here. 1 second here.
Whenever you're ready, darling.
Oh wait, that's the Martin Luther King thing. I may have lost it already.
Well,
here it is.
Yeah.
So this is Shoshana Zuboff on surveillance capitalism, VPRO documentary. We'll be right back after this.
There are some things that have broken through into the public view that we do know about. So let's talk about Facebook's massive scale contagion experiments. And this is where Facebook experimented with subliminal cues planted in its Facebook pages that would actually influence offline, real world behavior and emotions to see if they could make people feel happier or sadder using subliminal cues with language manipulation and word manipulation and so on. Well, when the experimenters wrote up this work in the very prestigious scholarly journals that published the results of these experiments, they emphasized two key findings. Number one, we now know that we can manipulate subliminal cues in the online context to change real-world behavior or real-world emotion. We know that we can be successful at doing this. Number two, we can exercise this power, these methods, while bypassing user awareness.
So how's that?
Well, as a person that's grown up in the connectivity world,
Yes.
I don't find that shocking. But tell it to me from your perspective, because you spent the first 30 years of your life pre-connectivity.
Right, so what that means is we are getting to the current events topic of Black Lives Matter, what's going on with
/ All Lives Matter
reform
/ Blue Lives
in our
Matter.
police, reform in, this is a racial battle, this is also a class battle. We're dealing with things that were never dealt with in the Occupy Wall Street. This is Occupy Wall Street hemorrhaging out through another front. And it will continue to hemorrhage out until the problem is dealt with. What I thought was interesting about this in context with what we're dealing with on the streets and the history of protest is I found in this documentary that I shared the comments from, this Surveillance Capital book, she gives a really interesting story. Artificial intelligence discovered a girl was pregnant before she knew she was pregnant.
And?
So what happened was she was looking for shampoo that was not as smelly as the shampoos she was using.
She was trying to find unscented shampoo.
Unscented shampoo. The algorithm took that information based with other information that she was sharing on Facebook, decided that she was pregnant because people who become pregnant have a much keener sense of smell. So they said, well, she's this age, she has a boyfriend, she's searching for this, so therefore she is pregnant. So they started targeting the home computer with baby ads and maternity and so on and so forth. This is an underage girl. The father starts noticing.
He also starts
getting. He starts noticing all this paternity stuff coming up on his computer.
So she's getting baby ads and he's getting baby ads.
So he was concerned maybe she was Googling about how to be a mom. So he confronts her on it.
Wait, her dad or the dad of the baby?
The dad of the girl who is pregnant. She's in a house.
Okay, so the girl is targeted with baby ads, and then
her
father is also her father.
Her father.
Oh boy.
Says what's going on. Why are these ads on my computer? Right. So they ended up finding out that she didn't know she was pregnant.
Right. It was so early on she hadn't even thought to check yet.
The artificial intelligence knew she was pregnant,
based on her
or
posts.
guessed that she was pregnant.
Maybe she was talking about foods that she really wanted. Maybe she was talking about unscented shampoo. Maybe she was talking about getting to go on a weekend with her boyfriend.
Facebook updates. I'm feeling like I have weird food cravings. Whatever the thing was, she didn't know she was pregnant, but Google did. The AI knew she was pregnant or guessed she was pregnant. So what's happening in our feeds is while we are still dealing with 20th century models, the 21st century economic political models are being implemented, and we're not dealing on that level. So when you see that there was a planned protest, let's say there's a planned protest. When everybody shows up at that protest, all those faces are being
check.
Right. All those faces, all the information from your cell phone.
All you iPhone users who have your location services on all the time.
All that cell phone data is being read. The connections between all that people is being read. So it feels like, from that kind of information, that there are entities, corporate entities, artificial intelligence, do we call that an entity? They're working for somebody. Somebody created the artificial intelligence. That information is now going to corporate entities.
Going to people.
We are known better by the algorithm than many of us know ourselves.
Okay, I agree with that too.
So we may be just trying to find ourselves, but we have been heavily researched, documented, collated. Information like, I just want to change my shampoo. The AI says you might be pregnant, but they didn't tell us that, right? So there's all kinds of assumptions being made about us by an artificial intelligence, one that doesn't understand irony, by the way. We'll get to that later in this next week's show. And so our worldview is being shaped by an artificial intelligence that may very well know more about us than we do. So when
How
you
does that
have
make you feel?
when you have a social movement where we're like, hey, we need to go protest against the power of the police, the undue power that the police station has to kill people with impunity. We want to go protest that. What's happening in that protest is it's being managed by artificial intelligence because you have a lot of connected kids that are at that thing. So all your participation is being logged. The people that are most active are being highlighted. So when a protest is being organized, who is organizing the protest? Is this a sort of public relations Freudian way to off-gas people so they feel like they're making change?
Are you suggesting that it's possible some protests are organized by players who know that if we get a protest going, it'll help people feel better about themselves and they won't do something worse?
I think it's a way to figure out who's who, whether the protest is organic or planned by some organization like Black Lives Matter, or planned by some ally of Black Lives Matter that may be a psychological operation by the CIA. That's not a far-reaching idea. If you want to know who's who and what's what, you already know it before they come to the protest. You already know the memes that they were sharing, the articles that they've been reading. You already know.
Right, because your Google data and your phone data and your Facebook data and your Twitter data
Getting them
and Verizon data.
Right, getting them to the place, you definitely then separate people who are going to be active participants and people who are going to be passive participants. So I feel like what's happening is we need to be dealing with the real, with the core of the problem. And often we don't get to the core of the problem, because we're dealing with symptoms. Our medical model is built on taking care of symptoms and not dealing with root causes of our illnesses.
You have back pain. I will give you something so that you don't feel back pain anymore, not to figure out why you have back pain.
Our social narrative is dealing with symptoms and not with causes. So many friends of mine that love to post anti-Trump things all day are dealing with the symptoms and they're not dealing with the source of the problem.
Right.
If you're focusing a lot of time on Trump, which is a deplorable individual who, if you're going to use the terrain theory of disease, we were ripe for that person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come here. The system allowed him in. It's supposed to be our system.
But
the system allowed him in. Now we're getting mad at the disease, in this case, Donald Trump, rather than dealing with the terrain that was compromised enough that allowed the disease to take root.
Right, like we
So we're not changing the terrain. We're not changing the conditions that allowed a Trump to occur. Because we're focusing on the symptom, the way our medical model does.
The Trump is a virus, like the coronavirus, if we want to go into analogy land. And the country was sick, is sick.
Yes.
Like ate too much sugar and already has hypertension, and along comes this virus, and boom, it stuck in ways that it shouldn't have stuck.
People got sick because they were compromised.
Yes.
We know that. We know it's generally not hitting healthy people with healthy immune systems. It's hitting people who are compromised.
Yeah.
So
people in this country know that things are messed up, and a lot of us civilians disagree with each other on what we should be doing to fix the things that are messed up. And enough citizens thought that maybe someone that wasn't a smarmy politician would make things better.
So let's go into this Black Lives Matter story.
Okay, Boyce Brown has a good lead-in for that.
Okay, what's he got?
He says the police riots include arresting and roughing up legacy media. I don't know what legacy media is.
CNN, MSNBC.
Okay, so they're already arresting and roughing up people with shirts on Like, these people are going
Press,
in with a
they're
shirt
press.
that says press in
Yes.
giant white letters.
Yes.
And they're standing there with a cameraman and a microphone, and the police are arresting them and beating them.
That happened at Standing Rock. They targeted, we were
That's
required.
the mainstream media.
Right, we were required to wear press badges at Standing Rock because they didn't let cameras come in unless they were from vetted press.
Right. So he
once
goes
you had
on.
that, you would get targeted by the rubber bullets and the gas
Right.
and the cannons if you were on the front line.
We don't want cameras seeing what's going on.
Right.
Might be a thought that you might have when that happens. If
Press-
someone's trying to shut down the news,
Yeah.
it might be because they don't want the news getting out. That's a correlation
Yes.
that pops into my head when I hear that. Boyce Brown goes on, independent journalism is about to completely eclipse legacy media, and
Yeah.
they are just getting arrested and shot in the eyes and cameras. Since law is no longer a redress, how do we physically protect frontline live streamers and videographers and make sure the word and human rights abuses get out there?
That is a good question.
Especially because we already have 3 huge lies in just the past week
Yeah.
that people have gone on, have said, no, this happened, and then the camera footage shows up and they're like, you are totally lying.
Yeah, you're lying.
So this horde of 50 cops is walking down the street in Baltimore, right?
You're talking
Buffalo,
New York.
So 50 cops walking down the street. It's just cops. They haven't even encountered protesters yet. And an elderly gentleman walks up to them and he has a notepad in his hand, but he walks up to the cop to start talking to him, and the cop shoves him.
Somebody actually said what he had in his hand was some piece of police gear that had been knocked off of a cop.
Oh gosh.
And he was returning it to the cops, and probably he's an active peace, he's a known peace activist.
Okay.
But he was apparently returning a piece of gear that belonged to the police department,
Right.
but that had strong things to say.
That's not even the worst part.
Right.
He walks up, within less than 5 seconds, the cops have knocked him to the ground, and he trips backwards in such a way that he smacks his head against the concrete and his head starts bleeding. And it's all on camera. You can watch the whole video. And one cop stops to turn to start to bend over to try to check on this guy, and his other cop buddy pulls him away to keep marching.
Yes.
And then the whole rest of like 50 cops just keep walking past this elderly man bleeding out on the ground.
Right.
And their report said was that he tripped and fell.
He tripped and fell.
So they made it's like people don't know cameras exist.
So
everyone has a camera now.
The guys that were caught in the shot were suspended, and then 47 cops resigned.
And people were like, that's great, they're resigning because of the horrible thing their brothers did.
They resigned in solidarity with the guys that beat up the old man.
They resigned in protest of their brothers getting suspended for knocking an elderly man to the ground.
So this is the moving target issue that we're having. So we're dealing with Black Lives Matter because a black man was killed, and it's a part of a systemic system where black guys are being killed with impunity by the police.
I like that moving target thing, because we got to talk about it from a lot of
It's
different
a
angles.
moving target. So right now, who's the enemy? Is it the police? Are the police the enemy?
The enemy.
Right. Or are the police the front for some other economic force or political force or racist force? Who is the actual enemy? I went in to look at the Fraternal Order of Police. So in the
Fraternal Order of Police.
Right. Which is a fairly misogynistic term, I would think. But it's still called the Fraternal Order of Police, even though they are policemen and policewomen. The Fraternal Order of Police is, briefly, the nation's largest political association, a police association, boasting more than 300,000 members belonging to 2,000 or so local chapters, some of which are unions, and others which are simply fraternal organizations. The Fraternal Order of Police national leadership consists of 7 white men. Many local chapters appear to be run by white cops, even in cities with police forces that are predominantly of color. The Chicago,
Wait, say that again one more time.
Many local chapters appear to be run by white cops, even in cities with police forces that are predominantly of color.
Okay.
The Chicago Fraternal Order of Police has no black officers on the executive leadership team. Neither does the 9-member executive leadership board of the California State Group. They're all white. Fraternal Order of Police. The organization endorsed Donald Trump for president during the 2016 race, and soon after the election issued an advisory, quote unquote, for the new administration's first 100 days. So the Fraternal Order of Police endorsed Trump and then said, oh, by the way, you should pay attention to this. Wink, wink. This advisory was a document that reads like a wish list of everything a fan of violent and undemocratic policing could hope for, and the GOP got most of it. They got the deprioritization of Obama administration's policing commission recommendations, a reversal of the Department of Justice's ban on private prisons, the return of civil asset forfeiture, the end of DACA, and a crackdown on sanctuary cities.
Do you know what DACA is?
Yes, that's dealing with kids of undocumented parents and what we do with them. The end, all of which aim to reduce the harm done to communities of color by the criminal justice system. So the Fraternal Order of Police has political power.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of votes, and that's a lot of money. And when they endorsed the Trump administration, they made sure to roll back progressive forces within the police culture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Fraternal Order of Police has been around since, who knows, I don't know how long. It's been around since the turn of the last century. The 1920s came the Auxiliary Fraternal Order of Police, and that was Wives of Police.
Wives of Police.
Wives of Police.
Okay.
There were no women allowed into the Fraternal Order of Police until the 80s, I believe. They started letting men into the Auxiliary, which they stopped calling the Ladies Auxiliary in the 80s.
So, male police officers or just dudes?
Husbands of female police officers. So trying to find information on how many females are a part of a fraternity.
Right.
It's really difficult. In the time
Are
I was
there
doing
any
research,
female
there
cops
are. If you're
in
a cop,
the fraternity?
you can be in the fraternal, which is a brotherhood. Again, it's still really male language. So
Right.
if we're talking about police reform, we have to look at something that's going to be really difficult for our Democratic friends, because you're dealing with the Fraternal Order of Police as a fraternity, but also as a union in many precincts.
Right.
So
And we're
Democrats like to support unions.
right.
But the power of this union, what happens with the Fraternal Order of Police is every time a black person has been killed, a high priority case where a black person has been killed, and it turns into something like what happened with George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
The Fraternal Order of Police takes care of that cop.
Funds their lawyers.
They fund their lawyers, they
Funds
find
their
them other
move.
jobs, finds them other jobs, and supports them.
Mm-hmm.
So so when we talk about dealing with the police, I think it might be worth dealing with a cancer within the police,
Mm-hmm.
which might be the Fraternal Order of Police, which is problematic because it's fraternal and it's also
A union.
It's also a union
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
It makes it rather untouchable in a lot of ways.
Right. So you have there's Noble. Let me go a little further on this article. This article, by the way, I'm gonna read this real quick. This article is written by Gene Mall. He's a, oh wait. No, that's somebody else. This article is called, Why the Fraternal Order of Police Must Go. It's written by Paul Butler, a former federal prosecutor. Is the Bennett Bosky visiting professor at Harvard Law School and Albert Brick professor of law at Georgetown University. Is the author of Chokehold: Policing Black Men. I'm going to go further with a piece from his article.
So is this the part of the show where we say hashtag not all cops?
Well, not yet.
Okay.
We'll just let that ride for a minute. I'm going to try to get through this, and then we get to the top of the hour, and then we'll come back and deal with some things that you've been looking into as well. The major cities, this is from that article, the major cities police chiefs organization supported the Obama Policing Commission's recommendations, while the FOP advisory included deprioritizing some or all of them. The Fraternal Order of Police is known for defending just about any officer involved in the high-profile killing of black men, while the leadership of Noble, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, continually calls for police reform in response to such events. So if we're going to go, the cops are bad, get rid of the cops, I think it's worth looking at elements within the police force that are working to reform and highlight who those people are, like Noble.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know much about Noble. They may be a horrible organization as far as I know. I have no idea. But they're advocating for reform.
Uncle Tom.
Perhaps.
I learned that term today.
they may be advocating for reform
Mm-hmm.
because of pressure from their community, being black,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have the power that the Fraternal Order of Police does.
Right.
So the Fraternal Order of Police, it's an interesting loop because the police are used by the powers that be, unfortunately. Police are doing things, you can find plenty of evidence with what the police are doing in their jurisdiction is not protecting and serving the people. A big example would be the racist drug policy of the 1970s,
Mm-hmm.
Where they criminalized marijuana, which criminalized people who were not committing crimes.
Right.
Now the police will enforce this law, which puts black people in jail, which causes disproportionate
Broken homes,
strife within a
loss of
community,
income.
right? So people who are not communities, because you changed the law, you criminalize something that was not a crime.
Mm-hmm.
Now people who were not criminals are seen as criminals.
Mm-hmm. And all the
And
shame,
the police have to enforce the law, or they do enforce the law as a part of their job,
Mm-hmm.
which is enforcing a political strategy, an economic strategy, and a racist strategy.
Mm-hmm.
We know those things. So unfortunately, a police force that can have black, white, Chinese people can go out and enforce a law that is not good for any of those groups.
Right. It's a racist law.
It's a racist law.
Yes.
It's not good for poor people. It's not good for jazz musicians. It's not good for various artists. It's not good for the radicals that were protesting against the Vietnam War. So when you have that kind of power, so the police, this is a perspective,
Mm-hmm.
the police are enforcing the corporate state. Because we don't live in a civic state anymore. We live in a corporate
And this
state.
is the part of the show where we have to zoom out and zoom in.
Let's zoom out. Let's zoom out. So zooming out, we do not live in a democracy. We do not live in a democratic
The
republic.
U.S.
The U.S. does not live in a democracy. We do not live in a democratic republic, which has been the story for a long time, but we are not a democratic republic. Other people would say that we are a representative democracy, which is also not the case.
And that means citizens don't.
Which is the case, actually. So a representative democracy means some choices are made locally by the citizens, other choices are made by representatives.
Most choices are made by representatives.
The vast majority are made by representatives. So we are electing.
You vote for someone to make choices for you.
We are electing people to go to institutions such as Congress, the United States Congress, that has an approval rating of about 10 or 12%.
As in, the citizens of the United States think that Congress isn't doing a very good job.
So we're exercising our right to vote to send people to an organization that we have no faith in.
Mm-hmm.
That's not democracy. The actions that are happening in Congress and the Senate are often dictated by the kind of support they had to get to their seat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know some people will disagree and will say it's just the Republicans and there's no corruption whatsoever in the Democratic Party.
And vice versa.
Right.
It's just the Democrats, not the Republicans.
So there is problems with our institutions. We think that we're voting and changing our institutions. We are not. We're not changing them. So the system is broken because it's an oligarchy. It's not a democracy. It's an oligarchy. So
What's an oligarchy, Dark?
An oligarchy is where powerful business interests are using the systems of governance to get what they want.
Right.
Not to have the systems of governments serve the people that it's supposed to serve. So we don't live in we live in an oligarchy. You can call it oligarchy. You can call it a kleptocracy. That's also a very accurate term for where we are. It's a kleptocracy. It's ruled by people who are out for their own self-interest.
Kleptomaniac being somebody that just steals stuff.
It's habitual. So the system is built up to, has changed to a point, whatever the inspiration of the system was, at this point, it's no longer that.
So, for instance, the people of Flint, Michigan obviously want to have clean water. They're campaigning and voting for clean water. People worldwide are campaigning and voting for Flint to have clean water. And yet, even though all of the citizens of Flint want clean water, their representatives are not voting to make General Motors clean up its mess and give Flint clean water.
So I want to be really careful because for people who are protesting against racism, where if you look at, say, people will use crime stats of black people and say, see, black people commit more crime. And then you can go down the rabbit hole of what is the context, what is the historical context, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can use stats to go in any direction you want if you're creative enough, and if you leave certain context out of that information. The same thing is with the police. I do not doubt that there are some people who took the job. I'd like to read there was
Go ahead and finish that sentence.
Yeah.
I think that's an important sentence.
What was I saying?
You don't doubt that there are people who took the job to
take care of their family and to protect their
neighborhood.
to protect their neighborhood, and they saw movies when they were a kid, and it looks like I could be a good guy and be
Many
a cop.
of our
right?
listeners might even know somebody who's a cop, like their grandpa or their wife.
We may have police officers who listen to the show.
Right.
Now, to throw all police, because I have good friends of mine that are intelligent people that are throwing all police into one category, which I think is problematic. If the force itself can be shown to not be serving the people in general, but serving corporate interests, that does not mean that everybody on the force knows that that is what they are doing.
That's true.
It's unfortunate for some folks. It's like you can join the army to get a scholarship, but then when we go to war, you didn't want to go to war, but now you're going to war, and now you're involved in something that you didn't want to do. But that's a part of economic hardship.
You have
where
to
you
take
make
the
that
job.
choice.
We have
Now
to take
you
a
have to
break
take-
and
yeah.
play our top of the hour underwriter, and then we'll be right back.
Very good.
The meth comes from the View Frame Shop in Gallup, located on Main Street in Uptown Butte, just across from the Pecan Noodle Parlor. The View Frame
Our
Shop
video hasn't
offers
cut out yet.
matting services
What?
for holidays.
The video's cutting out?
and more.
Hasn't yet.
Reach them by phone at 782
We called them out.
7710.
And we're back. Thank
Oh,
you
yeah.
so much to the Beat Frame Shop. So, I guess that was our hashtag not all cops moment.
Well, it's a difficult thing. So
But
the
just
thing
like,
that I
just like
just
that,
said.
let me just say,
Yes.
just like the hashtag not all men comment, if you happen to be in the group of people that is being called out for abuse, part of the accountability goes on to you to try to rat out the abuse in your group.
It's difficult when you have a fraternal order.
When 50 cops walk past an old man bleeding out on the sidewalk because they're afraid of getting in trouble with their bosses or
Yeah.
their mates,
Right.
that's a problem.
Or showing weakness. That could be
Where are the
right.
good apples in that group?
So it's difficult to see that, and I find it ironic. We're lacking a lot of irony. We have some irony deficiency in our culture.
Irony deficiency.
Where to say all cops is, I feel like it's a difficult thing for me to say yes to.
It's incorrect, for one thing.
Broad strokes are convenient.
And if you've never been in a tight-knit group like a cultish church or a police station or the military
A fraternal
or
organization.
a fraternity, if you've never been in a tight-knit group, then you might not understand how deeply those ties run and how much the desire to protect your brothers from discomfort overrides your awareness that you should maybe stop and help the old man bleeding out on the sidewalk.
Right, so we looked in, there's an old thing that I had to look up today because for years, I used to use this information because it fed my prejudice. So there's some information that came out. There was a court case in New York where somebody applied for the police department. They did an IQ test. He scored too high and they wouldn't hire him.
Yes, and he
So
sued
then
them for a long time.
He sued them. So that became the story, that you cannot get into the police if your IQ is too high.
And now that police station's reason for only interviewing average to low IQ policemen for that job was because they didn't want to spend money and energy training someone who would then get bored and move on to another job. And studies do show that highly intelligent people job hop because they get bored.
Right.
So the official story is that that police station doesn't tend to hire high IQ cops because they don't want to waste time training someone who's just going to leave. However, the internet took it and ran with it and created a trope that may or may not be true.
Well, what happens is you find out that, as I did deeper research, that different precincts have different processes for vetting people. There's all kinds of information out there. What I found was that most cops in this evaluation are about at the same level as most people, IQ-wise.
Yeah.
So we are being, generally speaking, policed by our
peers,
intellectual peers.
Generally.
Now, that's IQ.
But, I mean, we also have to say the U.S. average is at the very low range of not mentally disabled. So, like you said earlier, when we looked up the US IQ range, there's a range, and say it's like 80 to 110 is the average range, and then anything below 80 is considered mentally disabled in some way. And the US average is like 82.
Okay. We're right on the edge of mentally disabled.
Right, average.
Average. Right.
And so is our police force.
Right, because they correspond to our average IQ.
Right.
Generally speaking.
Generally speaking, you don't have people with high IQs on police forces. And lots of police forces have been tested.
So there's a study by this guy named Joel Lefkowitz where he identified 2 personality trait clusters which commonly appear in police officers.
Okay.
Cluster 1, isolation and secrecy, defensiveness and suspiciousness, and cynicism. Suspiciousness and cynicism increase with experience on the job.
Okay.
So that's a type of people who are attracted to that job. Lefkowitz refers to their situation as socio-occupational isolation. Cluster 2, authoritarianism, status concerns, and violence. Authoritarianism, identification with and submissiveness to authority, intolerance of minorities, rejection of anything abnormal, and a high pressure of conformity. Those were 2 pretty steady clusters that he noticed in the personality types of people who became police officers. And that those personality traits often, especially the first one, became more acute as you become a police officer and you're secretive and you feel isolated.
People mistreat you for being secretive, so you become more secretive.
Right,
it's a vicious spiral.
It's a vicious spiral. So it's important to talk about, we have police in Butte, Montana. They have a different job than the people in San Francisco. They have a different job than the people in Los Angeles. They have a different job than the people in New York. We have different issues.
Yeah.
So when people say all cops are bad, does that mean the folks in Butte?
Right.
Who are dealing with different issues?
It's hard for me to have this conversation because I've met and interacted with almost all of our cops here.
Yes.
And I don't know them personally, and I don't know how they treat their wives, and I don't know what their IQs are. But I've had positive interactions with the cops in Butte, and I also know people who have had negative interactions, or at least neglectful interactions with the cops in Butte.
Or that there have been actions by the police in Butte that is not necessarily their call, but it's something they're doing according to, they're enforcing a systemic issue.
Right.
They're enforcing some systemic plan. So it's a difficult issue for people who want clean lines, like the moving target issue.
Who's the bad guy?
So if you want to say, let's just get rid of all the cops, that's a discussion. Should cops
I didn't know that was a discussion before this past week.
Should cops be dealing with drugs? Or should that be a health service? Should cops be dealing with getting a kitten out of a tree? Or is that some other agency? There's many different things that police are called for that they may not really have the expertise for,
but they're expected to respond. Yeah, police academy is generally, you can get an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, or a master's degree in policing. I don't really know what that is. But the easiest way to become a cop is to do police academy, which is always under a year of training.
Yes, right.
I'm guessing that probably doesn't have like racial training, gender training, mental health training. Like they're professionals in these fields for a reason.
That stuff moves in slowly when under pressure. So when you have a culture, so our police force has a culture, and if you want to go way, way, way back, if you go into the origins of policing in America, the forebears to the current police force were people who captured slaves. They captured slaves who had escaped.
And so the forebears, the invention of the police force was to capture slaves.
Slave patrol.
And also to oust Native Americans from their property.
Yes.
And there was a third one. But it was like they also, I saw this comic that included like early police for capturing slaves, early police for getting rid of Native Americans, and then they also included the Canadian Mounties in there as well.
Right. So it has a troubled history. And unfortunately, when you have fraternal orders, traditions continue. I spent a week in LA County. I was a white guy.
Right.
Back then.
You're still a white guy today.
I was a white guy. I went to LA County for a week. I spent Christmas in LA County. and I heard stories about LA County Police, LA County Sheriff's Department, that it was like the Valhalla of racists. That good old boys from Arkansas and Kansas and Idaho wanted to go to be on the LA County Sheriff's Department because they could be racist with impunity, and that it was
without consequences.
It was so endemic that no, like, press, media would not touch the racism because they feared for their life. When I went to LA County, and I'm going through the processing, I watched LA County sheriffs pull black men out of the room that I was in while we're being processed, take them into another room, beat them silly, and bring them back in for no reason other than they could do it. They didn't pick me out. And I spent a week there, and I got to talk to the folks who were in jail. And they were there because they had excess parking tickets. And they went to 7-Eleven to go get a candy bar for their honey, and it was Christmas time, and they had quotas, so that guy now spending Christmas in LA County.
Yeah.
I was more afraid of the police than I was the people I was spending time with in LA County. And I was spending time with white supremacists, cholos, black folks. The whole spectrum was in there.
Yeah.
The people that I was afraid of were the sheriffs. They were the scary ones. Gang members, they didn't have any beef with me because I was white.
Not because you were white.
No. So I got to watch systemic racism and the commodification of that racism. One of the things that I experienced in LA County was that I got woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go taken to the old LA County jail to be sorted into another cell to be taken to another courthouse because I had some outstanding ticket.
Right. From
some other offense. So it was a jaywalking ticket from before I had ever moved to California, but it was still on my record. So I had to go deal with that issue. So I get woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Jail food is not good, but the jail food you get when you're being transported is worse. It's like a mealy apple and a bologna sandwich. So I ended up dealing with these guys who have been in the system for years and years and years. And so this guy says, so where are you going? I'm like, well, I'm going to Van Nuys. I'm like, where are you going? He's like, I don't know. I'm not going anywhere. I don't have any court dates. I'm like, well, why are you being put on the bus? And he goes, well, because the sheriff's department gets paid $75 to $100 for every body they have.
Every time they get transported.
I've got 30 days in jail, so they just roust me, put me on a bus, take me to another cell and another thing. I never see another judge. I get back, so it's like 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. They're being jostled around. It's less comfortable than regular jail, let me tell you that.
Yeah.
And they had no court date.
Right.
But the taxpayers are paying $75 to $100 for every one of those jerks that they pull out and put in. And that's
transport.
And they selectively pick those people. They're not going to pick me because I might say something, or I might have a white relative that has some power. They find people that they know have been through the system, and they know what their record is.
They know their relatives' experiences.
They know that they're not going to get busted for screwing with this guy, so they just keep doing that. So that's some corruption that could be dealt with.
I have been finding some really fantastic zines, so short, wordy, informational posts on Instagram about defunding or deregulating, or not deregulating, defunding or decommodifying police forces.
Yeah, what'd you find there?
So for instance, I think it might be useful just to present this as a possibility that you could go research if you were interested. You might be one of those people that's like, we can't not have police. And I would say
because that's the way it's always been.
If you have that mentality, that you might need to consider why you think we can't have police. And you might think we can't not have police because you are also thinking some people are just bad and we need police for the people who are just going to be bad.
Yeah, it's a nice good Judeo-Christian.
That's something to evaluate in yourself, in your own mind.
Sure.
Because what if people weren't homeless, weren't starving, had jobs, and had mental health care? Would some people just always be bad enough for us to need thousands and thousands of police officers in that case?
Well, that's something we should explore, maybe.
And so this zine by MPD_150. Won't abolishing the police create chaos and crime? How will we stay safe? Police abolition work is not about snapping our fingers and instantly defunding every department in the world.
Right.
Rather, we're talking about a gradual process of strategically reallocating resources, funding, and responsibility away from police and towards community-based models of safety, support, and prevention. The people who respond to crises in our community should be the people who are best equipped to deal with those specific crises. Rather than strangers armed with guns, who very likely do not live in the neighborhood they're patrolling, we want to create a space for more mental health service providers, social workers, victim survivor advocates, religious leaders, neighbors, and friends, all of the people who really make up the fabric of a community to look after one another. But what about armed bank robbers, murderers, and supervillains?
Yes, what about them?
Crime is not random, which goes against this kind of learned evangelical Christian mindset
Some
that
people are evil.
people are just bad for no reason.
Right. And they have
Because
all
of
of us
sin.
have to work to be good because we're all bad.
People are just bad for no reason because of sin. And my perspective now is that people do bad things because something else bad happened. People don't do bad things for no reason. So this zine continues. Crime is not random. Most of the time it happens when someone has been unable to meet their basic needs through other means. So to really quote unquote fight crime, we don't need more cops. We need more jobs, more educational opportunities, more arts programs, more community centers, more mental health resources, and more of a say in how our own communities function. Sure, in this long transition process, we may need a small, specialized class of public servants whose job it is to respond to violent crimes with proper training. But part of what we're talking about here is what role police play in our society. Right now, cops don't just respond to violent crimes, they make needless traffic stops, arrest petty drug users, harass black and brown people, and engage in a wide range of broken windows policing behaviors that only serve to keep more people under the thumb of the criminal justice system. But why not fund the police and all of these alternatives too? Why is it either or? It's not just that police are ineffective. In many communities, they're actively harmful. The history of policing is a history of violence against marginalized. American police departments were originally created to dominate and criminalize communities of color and poor white workers, a job that they continue to do to this day. This list has grown even longer. LGBTQ, people with disabilities, activists. So many of those groups are attacked by cops on a daily basis at a higher rate. And it's bigger than just police brutality. It's about how the prison industrial complex, the drug war, immigration law, and the web of policy, law, and culture that forms our criminal justice system has destroyed millions of lives and torn apart families. Cops don't prevent crimes, they cause it through the ongoing violent disruption of our communities. It is also worth noting that most social service agencies and organizations that could serve as alternatives to the police are underfunded, scrambling for grant money to stay alive while being forced to interact with officers who make their jobs even harder. In 2016, the Minneapolis Police Department received $165 million in city funding alone. Imagine what that kind of money could do to keep our communities safe if it was reinvested. And there's a quote at the end from the former Dallas Police Chief David Brown. "We're asking cops to do too much in this country. Every societal failure, we put it off on the cops to solve. Not enough mental health funding, let the cops handle it. Here in Dallas, we've got a loose dog problem. Let's have the cops chase loose dogs. Schools fail, let's give it to the cops. That's too much to ask. Policing was never meant to solve all those problems."
So that's all from the same zine. I appreciate everybody who's making comments today. We got a lot of feedback happening. Do we want to take a break?
And do some feedback?
Do some feedback.
I would love that.
Because I really want to get to the thing that you've been following for the last 24 hours, which is your friend on Facebook, who, bless them, said, "I don't understand why all lives matter is controversial."
Why is this racist?
So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments later, she still doesn't understand, apparently.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that because I think it's really important, but let's try to get to the comments that we have this far, and we'll do that. And then I would also like, for people who are listening and for our own edification of the time frame that we have here, I'd like to play an 8-minute clip at the end of the show.
Okay.
So we want to wind it up, and it's a debate.
That'll give me time to sanitize the station.
Yeah, it's a debate that I found between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, so stay tuned for that. But what do we got? What kind of feedback do we have?
Lynn Ferguson shared a link from HuffPost. "We're paying a shocking amount of money for police misconduct." I would suspect that link is probably talking about the amount of money that goes to fund
legal
police
battles.
departments, and then the amount of money that goes to fund all the legal battles when they mess things up because they don't have proper training.
Right.
And then she also shared a link from ABC News, U.S. cities and taxpayers paying millions in police misconduct settlements. So that in and of itself is a great reason to minimize the police department and invest that money into systems that would empower people to take care of their own communities instead.
To wind up one thing that I brought up before, which was about this idea of the fraternal order of police, I'm not ready to go all cops are bad. I just can't do it. I feel like it's a dumb
blanket
way to go.
statements are always incorrect.
Generalizations. It's a general prejudice, which I think is a problem. So I would say I think it might be useful to look into the fraternal order of police. There are other orders, police orders. Fraternal order of police is the oldest and the largest, and it seems to have some pretty sketchy records when it comes to race relations.
Injected accountability, that would help.
So I think the fraternal order of police, I think I would like to shed light on the fraternal order of police and not just police in general. Yes. I think the fraternal order of police is something that we might want to look into and educate ourselves on and see if there might be something there.
Specifically incestuous, self-protective sort of group where you just cover for your brother because...
Is your politician being funded by the Fraternal Order of Police?
Ooh.
Did the Fraternal Order of Police donate to your campaign? And what does that mean? We know what it meant for Trump when they donated.
Right.
Suddenly he rolled back all of Obama's stuff that was meant to protect minorities. It's something worth looking into. That's I want to direct that.
Yeah, for sure.
Comments.
Norma Jean says, corporations like banks can pay for better security instead of police. So, speaking of more highly trained security being paid for, who are all those guys in Washington, D.C. this week?
Best that I can find out. Some are unknown, but as far as I know, William Barr from the Department of Justice found a little-known army that are prison guard riot cops.
So, specially trained dudes. So they are private service.
Well, they're federal.
I thought the prisons were private.
Well, that's a good question now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is this a federal arm or is this a private arm? These are the things that also we need to be talking about.
And did they sign up for that job and be told, if you go under, we're not bailing you out because you're not technically connected to the government?
It's a good question.
Yeah, a bunch of heavily armed and heavily armored
unnamed
dudes showed up on the Lincoln Memorial with no badges and no names and no insignia.
So how do you know as a citizen whether that's somebody you should obey or should shoot? I notice the NRA has been really quiet about armed insurrection to protect us from a tyrannical government. Suddenly, they forgot, I guess. That's the whole premise of the NRA, is that we make sure we don't have a tyrannical government. And it seems like we're having a bit of a tyrannical government, and the NRA has been conspicuously silent on that.
Right. We did have that Second Amendment rights dude show up at the protest and whip out his bow and arrow to start shooting protesters.
Just wanted to support the cops.
Robert Edwards says, we tried, sorry, my computer's being really slow right now. Robert Edwards says, scroll. This experiment, I'm guessing he's talking about
getting rid of
not getting rid of, but de-commodifying cops so that they actually do cop jobs instead of responding to mental health crises or those sorts of things. He says this experiment has already been done. When police stopped policing black neighborhoods, the Black Panthers filled the void. And his comment ends there, so I have to assume that he thinks that was a bad thing.
No, I think he's I know that he has some libertarian leanings. So I assume that he thinks, see, you got rid of the state cops, the neighborhood took care of himself.
Really?
Well, the Black Panthers were doing things like, because they weren't being taken care of with social, they were being squeezed out economically because of systemic racism. And so the Black Panthers came in and filled the void with security, with lunches for kids who were financially compromised. They started performing all these social. So I imagine that he's saying, see, if we get rid of the state-funded cops, then we'll just take care of ourselves. I think that's what I'm going to imagine.
So we sort of agree?
Kind of. Yes.
I do think we should take a look at the egregious amount of money that goes into the police state that we already live in, that we don't think we live in, and that maybe that money could go towards preventative measures. A similar argument, I think...
With the drug policy.
Yeah, a similar argument, I think, is one of my favorite arguments to bring up with my pro-life friends who want to defund and criminalize abortion, is that if you really want there to be less abortions, you would give people correct sex education.
That would be helpful, and it's proven to be.
Yeah, if you taught people what their bodies do and gave them access to contraceptives, fewer people would be getting pregnant when they didn't want to.
You would have fewer religious people then.
Well.
Those are the ones pushing.
Yeah, but like, I'm just, you know.
It's not good for the church.
Anyway, it's a good analogy.
Let's go to your friend. Do we have more comments?
Okay, Robert Edwards feels like you really got him.
Okay,
he says, thank you, Dark.
Yeah.
He said, Norma Jean, you're sounding dangerously like a libertarian.
What did Norma Jean say?
I grew up with the Black Panthers and fed and cared for anyone, no matter their color, in Oakland.
Right.
Yeah.
So there is room. Now that would be, if you want to get down to it, that would be, you could call that libertarian, you could also call that anarchic.
Yeah.
That's a product of anarchy,
yeah.
Where self-organizing social structure.
Maybe less daddy telling us what to do all the time would work out better, but unfortunately, people who have been raised with the Judeo-Christian mindset that people are born broken think that we do need someone telling us what to do, or we will descend into horrible actions. So the idea of the police pulling out would be horrible, because then the whole neighborhood will just collapse into crime.
What's the idea of why people stay religious? Is that if they go away, the devil will get them or something.
Right. The only reason they're not raping people is because God tells them not to.
Right. Otherwise, they'd just be running around raping.
And there was a really great post that I have been unable to find in all of my notes, because I took a ton of notes, of a black guy breaking down why white people don't get what's going on in black neighborhoods.
Okay.
He's like, you guys don't understand why less policing would be good for us, or why black on black crime is not a helpful statistic to bring up. You know, a lot of people.
There's some contextualizing.
Yeah, there's some context. He says, I've done this talk at large organizations many times, and what I usually do is have everybody raise their hand if they have done non-religious community service that week. So several people, you know, like a bunch of people raise their hand, because a lot of people do volunteer.
Yeah,
you know, like maybe you volunteered at the animal shelter that week
with
your kid or something. And then he's like, okay, how many hours? 1 hour? 2 hours? 3 hours? He says at the end, the only hands left in the air are black hands. Non-religious affiliated community service. And he said, we are invested in our communities. We have picnics. We have study groups with teenage boys. We have mentorship programs. We are so, like, anyway, it was, I'm gonna have to find it again and bring it
that
up.
was a thread that came from the thread that I wanted you to talk about,
I know,
which is your well-meaning friend,
yes,
who just obviously does not consider herself being racist.
No. And so
she's a Christian kid.
I'm gonna be a good Baptist preacher.
Do it.
And I'm gonna tell people what I'm gonna tell them, and then I'm gonna tell them, and then I'm gonna remind them what I just told them.
Okay, do it.
So what I'm about to tell you is that there are many people who are resistant to the concept of systemic racism because they are resistant to the concept that they may have been brainwashed. Because systemic racism means that you might be doing things and participating in activities that are racist without meaning to, which means you are not in complete control of your own mind or your actions. And that is a very scary thought and a very foreign thought, especially to people who are literally being told what to do all the time by their religion.
By their religion, yes.
So now we're going to talk about my friend.
Okay.
Honest question. So this is she's late 20s. She has a few kids. She's very sweet and extremely well read. She has a black belt in karate or taekwondo. She speaks a couple different languages, has traveled to Europe several times. Like, this is
traveled and educated.
Traveled, educated mother.
Not a redneck in a trailer somewhere in Alabama.
So I'm trying to break through people's stereotypes of evangelical Christians.
Right.
She says, honest question, and if this turns ugly, I will delete it. Why does saying all lives matter make me racist or part of the problem? Isn't equality the whole point? That no person should be considered better than another person by the color of their skin? If I say all lives matter, doesn't that inherently assume that black lives matter too? Because of course black lives matter. Very few people I hear saying all lives matter would disagree with that statement. In fact, I'd argue that they're including a broader view of society, such as Hispanics and Asians and other minorities. How does saying all lives matter mean I'm glossing over the sufferings or mistreatment of a certain segment of society? Asians during World War II were victims of racist mistreatment. Americans of Middle Eastern descent have been misjudged too, especially since 9/11. Isn't Black Lives Matter by default alienating those groups? How is all lives matter racist?
So that was her initial.
She's really honestly seeking help.
Honest inquiry.
Yes.
So I know how these communities work. She's coming from a community. Oof. It's probably all lives matter is fine within her community. Mm-hmm. And when she said it, she had friends who were probably also tangentially or directly in her community, but maybe outliers or something. I don't know how the whole thing works. Who said, yeah, you need to look at that. Mm-hmm. And what happened?
120 comments within an hour.
Wow.
Yeah. So many people. So this young woman has friends so she goes to a church that has like 200 or 300 people every Sunday.
Okay.
And they largely communicate and interact in fellowship with those same 3-ish hundred people every Sunday. My family also goes to that church in Virginia. And so that's her main community, is other evangelical Christians. But she also has friends all over the country of various belief systems. And she doesn't just have evangelical Christian friends.
Okay.
And so a lot of people got into her comments and put up all of the analogies that people are bringing up. Bob is sitting at the table eating dinner, and Bob doesn't have food, and he says, Bob needs food. And everybody at the table said, everybody needs food. And people brought up the burning house analogy. So this house is on fire, and somebody comes to you and says, we need to put out this house, it's on fire. And she's like, I care about all houses.
Right.
So they're bringing up all these analogies.
That's how it looks when you don't, from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Right.
They feel like.
Was she convinced?
Several people said my thoughts exactly. One friend says, I used to think the same way until someone took the time to educate me. House on fire analogy. Your heart is the right spot, but by speaking over the Black community who is trying to say all lives don't matter until Black lives matter also, is cutting them off. To use the fire analogy, it's watching their house burn and gripping your water pail close to your chest, because how dare they insinuate I don't matter as much as they do. So they're going, these are some really great breakdowns. She says, and so over and over again, this friend
keeps resisting.
I don't think she feels like she's resisting. She just keeps coming back to, okay, but why can't we say all lives matter? Okay, but why can't we just say all lives matter? And the thing that I came down to after reading these 120 comments, because I'm sort of getting to a point halfway through where I'm like, yeah, why do people hate all lives matter so much? And once somebody finally brought it up, she finally brought it home in a way that I felt like really ought to have gotten through to my friend. And she used an analogy that is close to home for evangelical Christians, which is March for Life stuff, rallying around abortion clinics. Okay. And so what people in this church will do is go and walk outside abortion clinics with signs and their children and try to convince women not to go get abortions.
Okay.
And so this person said, look, if you are at an abortion clinic protesting for the lives of the unborn and saying fetal lives matter, and someone comes up and yells from their car, yeah, all lives matter, you would feel like they were diminishing
your
cause right then. And my friend still responded to that analogy with, I would assume they were on my side. So that's when I had to realize there is some sort of super deep psychological resistance, a deep psychological resistance that maybe she's not aware of, to the idea that racism exists in a way that she wasn't aware of before.
Right. How do you care about something that you don't know? Like for myself, I didn't understand, until I spent a week in LA County, I didn't understand what systemic racism meant. Until I talked to the people who were victims of it.
Yeah.
In the system.
Right.
Literally. Then I started to understand what systemic racism meant. Before that, it wasn't in my experience. There was no place for it to land. I didn't do it. I'm a white guy, but I didn't do
You're
anything.
a poor white guy.
Right. The reason I was in jail was not because I was a criminal. It was because I was poor. So and that's when, Martin Luther King lived for a long time doing civil rights. When he started doing poor people's rights, he didn't live much longer. When he started uniting poor white people with poor black people, with poor Latinos, and saying, this is a world, it's a culture. Not everybody wants to have $1 billion and own the world. Some people just want to live their lives. And some people would like to improve their lives. And it doesn't have anything to do with race. When he started talking about that, that's when he got killed. And I think Black Lives Matter is a social struggle through one lens of the social struggle, which is about the class issue that we're having, economic issue. We have a yawning economic divide. More and more people are poor. There's the crust of the middle class, which keeps the poor people from revolting and throwing pitchforks at the rich people. That crust is getting thinner and thinner because of the economic divide.
Middle class people think there are more middle class people than there actually are.
They're under a huge delusion, in my opinion, that middle class is America.
Right.
It's a thin crust.
Sorry, America's a poverty country by the statistics.
Yeah,
we're a poverty country.
Yeah.
By the statistics of incomes, of poverty brackets, and how many people live in poverty in the U.S. Robert Edwards says, replying to a comment from earlier, the NRA is a gun rights group, and that's it. They don't fight other people's battles. NRA has been fighting for decades to ensure people have their constitutional right to firearms. They don't fight battles for people, they fight for people's rights to take up arms against a tyrannical government, not fight the battle for you.
Right.
So, you're right. It would be perhaps out of step for the National Rifle Association itself to say something.
Well, let's just talk about the members then.
Yes. And I did, actually. When the thing that made me leave Facebook for a while was that I made what I felt like was a super obvious post about how all of the white people who were heavily armed and armored protesting the lockdown and making death threats about their local representatives were not attacked by the police, but Standing Rock was brutally attacked by the police when they were not doing anything violent, and Minneapolis is being attacked by the police when they are not doing anything violent. And in a very short period of time, I had like 4 Second Amendment rights friends get on that comment and say, I really feel like these pictures that you're sharing, these comparative pictures, are proving that we do need Second Amendment rights. So that my statement was, I was seeing a racial thing. I was seeing Native Americans getting beat up, Black Lives Matter people getting beat up, but white dudes with guns making death threats not getting beat up. So I was seeing it through a racial lens. And what they saw was that people with guns don't get beat up by the cops. And it took me a minute to think that through, and if I had not just decided to leave Facebook because I was exhausted of fighting the battle for a while,
right,
I probably would have said something like, I don't think that in order to prevent police violence, we should threaten more violence. I think we should just stop the police from being violent.
That's an issue that could be addressed.
Right. They're saying step 3. I'm saying, no, here are peaceful protesters being brutalized by the police. And they're saying, yes, that's why the peaceful protesters need guns. So that if Americans with guns try to shoot the Americans without guns, those Americans will actually have guns to shoot back at the Americans with guns that are shooting them. Yeah, and I'm like, maybe we could just have less people shooting at each other.
Yeah.
Maybe we could just have the cops not brutalizing people who haven't done anything violent.
So, in your reading of the hundreds and some odd comments from your friend who was sincerely trying to figure out why all lives matter is a faux pas, is a social faux pas in certain groups, did she find out why she gets negative feedback from certain parts of the community for using that phrase? Did she figure out why it's a problematic phrase for after 120 comments in 3 days?
She has continued to post about this ongoing conversation by sharing statistics.
Of how black people are criminals?
Yeah. She has posted a conversation from a rich black congresswoman who is married to a white Christian who works for Liberty University, Candace Owens.
Infamous Candace Owens.
All of my conservative friends are sharing Candace Owens.
My sister shared it.
Who breaks down how George Floyd should not be the figurehead of this movement because he is a felon.
That whole
she goes
argument,
through his entire rap sheet. So that's a whole other conversation.
That's somebody who doesn't agree with guilty until proven innocent. That's somebody who doesn't agree with our system.
What?
You don't kill somebody on the street. You arrest them and you take them into jail and you let the courts.
No, she says Chauvin totally shouldn't have killed that guy.
Oh.
He shouldn't have killed him. What the police officer did was wrong. But also, why are you all out there rioting over a man who has been caught with meth, who has held a gun on a pregnant woman, who has done breaking and entering, who's been in prison 12 times?
Because people have empathy and they saw a horrific scene of somebody being killed by state power, probably which would have been without ramifications for the people who killed that man.
Yeah.
Now, maybe next time the guy is not that guy.
My friend has, well, I mean, many of the people who have been accidentally murdered by the police
that's questionable.
Were perfectly normal citizens, quote unquote normal citizens. I hate acting like someone who has been convicted of a crime is a bad citizen because there are so many crimes that shouldn't be crimes. My friend, the conservative friend, has also posted a list of all of the officers who have been injured during the riots in the last week. She's also shared a quote from a pastor about how the gospel says, I'm held accountable for my sin, but social justice says, I am held accountable for my sin, the sin of my ancestors, and the sin of everybody around me. She shared a video of protesters who she says are Antifa, pulling people out of their cars and beating them. And she shared a quote by a black cop about how he is mistreated by his black neighborhood for being a black cop. And it just makes him so sad that he's trying to help his neighborhood and they're mistreating him. So it's, I don't want to say stereotypical in a derogatory way, but these are stereotypical things that concerned white people post because they're not racist. I'm not racist. Why is everybody trying to make me feel like I'm a racist? Look, black people like cops. Cops, you know, black people don't even like black people cops. Like all these different angles.
There's a lot of whataboutism.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, we need to do a whole show on like the history of systemic racism and just like an educational walkthrough of, I guess, to try to like lay it out for people.
Well,
black people aren't just bad people. There's a whole history of oppression and mistreatment that they're experiencing and struggling with, much like people who live in poverty and generational poverty.
Poor people problems.
Yeah.
We're getting down to the last quarter of the last hour.
Oh yeah, we have to do our bit.
I want to try to, we've got last 8 minutes, we're going to do Malcolm X and debate 8-minute thing with Malcolm X debating Martin Luther King.
Yeah, I think it's
8 minutes and 48 seconds. So we've got about 5 minutes.
It's really important to talk about that because all of my Christian friends have been sharing a quote from Martin Luther King about how peaceful protests are the only way and you should never let somebody else make you escalate to violence.
Okay.
And so like, and you made the comment that Malcolm X is almost never shared.
Malcolm X is not shared by white folks as much as Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
And we don't have time to do a lot of commentary on it. We'll do the last 9 minutes of the show.
We're just going to play it and leave it as is and move into Dan and Patty with the Sunday Smackdown.
So, do you want to try to...
I have so many other links open.
Put a bow on this? Try to wrap it up?
Clearly we're going to be talking about this a little bit more. It's complex.
It's a complex issue, and we're trying to make simple answers of a complex issue.
I think it's really important to try to figure out why why do people really want systemic racism to not be real? And why are people so resistant to saying Black Lives Matter instead of All Lives Matter? And if I were to be active on Facebook and respond to my friend, that's probably what I would say. Is I would say the thing that I think you need to evaluate is that you didn't just start saying all lives matter because you were like, you know what I should do is campaign for all lives.
Right.
You wanted to say all lives matter because you didn't want to say Black Lives Matter.
It was a reaction to Black Lives Matter. It's not an organic thing where you actually care about all lives.
It wasn't that you were already all lives mattering it out there.
Mm-hmm.
Black Lives Matter came up and you were like, but can't we just say all lives matter instead? And you need to figure out why. And that's something that only a person can evaluate for themselves. Is why do you not want to say Black Lives Matter?
Mm.
And really it might take you 3 or 4 whys.
Well, it took your friend hundreds and hundreds of comments, and she still hasn't figured it out.
That's why I think, and I'll go back to my what I said at the beginning, I think that there are a lot of people who are very resistant to the idea of systemic racism, because that would mean I do things and say things and think things that I didn't decide to do, say, or think. That were given to me by systemic racism. That means I've been brainwashed. And I don't like the idea that I've been brainwashed. Therefore, there can't possibly be horrible stuff going on in my community and in my behavior that I don't know about.
Next week, we're going to deal with the topic of censorship. And I think that will be a good place to deal with brainwashing.
Mm-hmm.
And the theory that I'm working on, which is, I know a lot of smart people who are convinced that their measured and studied perspective of the world is correct.
Yeah.
But it will never happen because everybody else is a moron.
That's the fear.
And so there's an interesting thing happening where all the smart people are convinced everybody else is dumb. I haven't found the dumb people because they're saying, well, I know what's right. We're going to make America great again, and the people who don't are dumb or evil. So we are not affecting change in our culture because of this sense of separation and isolation, and that we are the only ones that know what's going on. I'm convinced there's a plague of individuals thinking they're the only ones that know what's going on.
And if we
we
could
could
just
have
all
a better
get
world,
together.
but everybody else is too stupid to make it happen.
Wow, so nobody's talking about making it happen.
So nobody's talking about making it happen because of the fear of the overwhelming idiocy of everybody else. So trying to find common ground where people could say, no, there are things that lots of people want to see happen. We can't always agree on how it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that?
Well,
That's something that I want to talk about in terms of brainwashing. You and I were raised in cults. We were brainwashed.
And it goes back to
We
your
were mind
conversation last week about conspiracy theories and trying to break down for people that conspiracies exist, and so theorizing about them is a good idea and shouldn't be stigmatized. And the example that guy gave, that he often talked about things in scientific circles where everybody would act like they disapproved of him in the talk, and then come up to him individually afterwards and say, I really actually agree.
That's that phenomenon.
I agree about ESP and animals knowing when their owners are coming home ahead of time, but I can't talk about it because all of my colleagues would reject me. And every single colleague says that, but privately.
That's the phenomenon.
The fear of rejection.
So we're all brilliant. We all know what's happening in the world, but nobody else does.
Right.
It's a paradox that we're dealing with that's making change difficult. It's also the illusion of the solidity of the system. We don't think we can change the system. We don't think we can change the system because it's unchangeable, because it's too big. It's beyond
so
us.
big. Right.
That wasn't the way it was supposed to be designed. And I don't believe that's the way it is. I believe that's a perceptual management that we need to deal with. So dealing with, next week we're going to be dealing with censorship and the idea of mind control. You were mind controlled, I was mind controlled, we were brainwashed. It's easier for me to admit and recognize brainwashing and mind control when I see it happening to myself and other people, because I have recognized it at least once.
Yeah.
A lot of people are brainwashed and mind controlled. Their perspective are social. Your friend doesn't understand why she can't say white lives matter.
All lives.
All lives matter. Because if she says that, she will now have to confront her community.
If she were to say Black Lives Matter, she would have to confront her community.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. If she said Black Lives Matter, suddenly she's an outlier in her community.
Yes.
It's not just a perspective, it's an identity.
And it's her own
It's a group identity. It's her only community. So saying Black Lives Matter and saying, you know what, I will say that, means that the battle is going to leave Facebook, and it's going to be in her church, it's going to be in her home, it's going to be in her family,
With
it's
her
going to be in her
sons.
relationships. Identities have to change.
And she's going to be the weirdo that starts buying into the liberal agenda of racism.
It's easier to defend your brainwashing.
I recognize all of the tools that she's using to try to double down on her beliefs so that she doesn't have to change, because changing is exhausting and it takes a lot of work. And if you change and you're in a closely knit group like the evangelical church often is, if you change something that's outside of the group, you start getting treated differently by everybody, or in my case, completely kicked out.
Right. We're coming down to the end. We've got a few more minutes. Sunday Smackdown is coming.
Woohoo!
I do want to play this 8-minute and 48-second
Malcolm X
versus Martin Luther King, talking about how to go about it.
And thanks to everybody that joined our conversation this afternoon. We had about 10 people listening at beautyamericaradio.org/stream. I don't know how many of you were listening on Real Radios. And we also had about 10 people listening on Facebook and a few on Twitch. We really appreciate all of your comments. Robert Edwards, Greg Henley, Norma Jean Duffy, Scott Pattison. It's fun to hear from people that I haven't heard from in a really long time who tune in. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to everybody's comments. Myself, Ainsley, will be back on Thursday with the Jolly Roger, which is kid co-hosted talk radio. So if you are a kid or know a kid who might like to be on the radio, I do that every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. here in Butte.
Thanks for playing. We'll be back next week with a special guest.
Special guest! Woot woot!
Martin Luther King and Malcolm X debating. Stay tuned. I gotta go pee.
This music is great. Oh my gosh, it's
The
Rocky.
white man pays Reverend Martin Luther King, subsidizes Reverend Martin Luther King, so that Reverend Martin Luther King can continue to teach the Negroes to be defenseless. That's what you mean by nonviolence. Be defenseless. Be defenseless in the face of one of the most cruel beasts that has ever taken the people into captivity. That's this American white man. And they have proved it throughout the country by the police dogs and the police clubs. 100 years ago, they used to put on white sheets and use a bloodhound against Negroes. Today, they've taken off the white sheets and put on police uniforms. They've traded in the bloodhounds for police dogs, and they're still doing the same thing. And just as Uncle Tom, back during slavery, used to keep the Negroes from resisting the bloodhound or resisting the Ku Klux Klan by teaching them to love their enemy or pray for those who use them despitefully. Today, Martin Luther King is just a 20th century or modern Uncle Tom or a religious Uncle Tom who is doing the same thing today to keep Negroes defenseless in the face of the fact that Uncle Tom did on the plantation to keep those Negroes defenseless in the face of the attack of the Klan in that.
Well, I don't think of love as, in this context, as emotional bondage. I don't think of it as a weak force. But I think of love as something strong and that organizes itself into powerful direct action. Now, this is what I try to teach in the struggle in the South, that we are not engaged in a struggle that means we sit down and do nothing. That there's a great deal of difference between non-resistance to evil and non-violent resistance. Non-resistance leaves you in a state of stagnant passivity and deadened complacency, whereas non-violent resistance means that you do resist in a very strong and determined manner. And I think some of the criticisms of nonviolence, or some of the critics, fail to realize that we are talking about something very strong, and they confuse non-resistance with nonviolence.
The goal of Dr. Martin Luther King is to give Negroes a chance to sit in a segregated restaurant beside the same white man who had brutalized them for 400 years. The goal of Dr. Martin Luther King is to get Negroes to forgive the people who have brutalized them for 400 years by lulling them to sleep and making them forgetting what those whites have done to them. But the masses of black people in America today don't go for what Martin Luther King is putting down. As you said in one of your articles, is psychologically insecure or something of that sort. I don't know how to put it. But you didn't endorse what Martin Luther King was doing yourself.
I do not reject his goals of full integration and full equality rights for American citizens. Do you reject these goals?
If you don't think that he's walking on the right road, I'm quite sure you don't agree that he'll get to the right place. And if you would classify his method as psychologically unrealistic, I think that a man's method is psychologically unrealistic which means the road or the means or the method that he's using, I think as a psychologist, you would be very doubtful.
I don't think that's true. Anyone has ever lived with a nonviolent movement in the South, from Montgomery on through the Freedom Rides and through the sit-in movement and the recent Birmingham movement, and see the reactions of many of the extremists and reactionaries in the white community. He wouldn't say that this movement makes, this philosophy makes him comfortable. I think it arouses a sense of shame within him in many instances. I think it does something